Hey everyone, we're going to get started. Hi, welcome. This is Hope for Hoarding, from living on the street to living in supportive housing safely and sustainably. We're going to introduce ourselves. I'm Christine Boehler. I'm a program director for CUCS's Homeless Street Outreach program in northern Manhattan. Prior to that, I've been working in supportive housing and in group homes in New York and New Jersey for the last 9 years. A lot of experience with this population and with this situation. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, hi. My name is Lee Shuer from Western Mass, and joined the public mental health system back in 2000 and came out with my own lived experience with mental health challenges around 2003. Around 2007, came out with my experience with having too much stuff. So since then, it's really been a part of my life and my career to help develop tools that can help my peers to work through their clutter, as well as the people supporting them, family and service providers. So really trying to bring to you what's been helpful to people like me so that we can all get better together.
Hello, I'm Becca Belofsky Shuer, and I too have had up close and personal experience with issues relating to hoarding disorder, excessive collecting, and acquiring and keeping. And I've worked with people throughout the lifespan. I'm really interested in development from early on into later years. So we bring all this together and show people that people can get better. And there's really a great deal of hope that can be found and shared and spread with models of success. And that's what we hope to share with you today. Thank you.
So today, during our workshop, we're going to discuss how we might help Paul. I think you'll all recognize Paul as a client you may have worked with in some form or another. We're going to speak about him specifically as he transitions from street homelessness, living in a safe haven, and then into a permanent residence. So we're going to basically walk you through this with strategies to help him in 3 common scenarios. The first one is expectations and support for maintaining his living space. So this is sort of fresh from the street or the safe haven, moving into his first place for maybe the first time in a very long time. Then when he is maybe comfortable acclimating to living inside, filling up his apartment to unsafe levels. And then a struggle with bed bugs. Yes. And, so yeah, that's down, a little bit down the line, but we know it well. So we'll talk a lot about why he and other people tend to save things, and, ways that we can educate and empower him to reduce clutter in a way that's safe and supportive. And then I think we're going to just explore strategies that we can use with tenants who struggle in general with excessive clutter, whether or not they're the same as Paul, different as Paul, that share the common thread of having too much stuff or a lot of stuff. Okay, so let me describe Paul to you. So Paul is a gentleman in his 50s. He has lived on the street in and out of shelter for the past 10 years. Very pleasant. Every worker that has worked with him in any part of the process really, really enjoys working with him. He's that guy that's very, very personable, very eccentric. He's an artist. When he was living on the street, he had lots and lots of stuff, had shopping carts, moved inside, continued to sort of accumulate things, very, very creative. So makes art out of all of the things that he collects, a way of his creative outlet, I think, while he's outside. And in general, I mean, he's fairly stable otherwise. He drinks from time to time, not too much of a problem. And I want to stress that he's the guy that everyone likes and everyone can talk to.
I will lower the microphone way down. All right, let's see. Before we dive into talking with Paul, I'd like you to take a deep breath with me, because I want to introduce a quote by the Dalai Lama that I think is really something key to keep in mind as we work with people. It benefits everyone. So the Dalai Lama said, "I'm Tibetan, I'm Buddhist, I'm the Dalai Lama. But if I emphasize these differences, it sets me apart and raises barriers with other people. What we need to do is pay more attention to the ways in which we are the same as other people." And I really feel that that's a key idea to keep with us as we engage with people from different backgrounds, people that might seem so very different from us. But it's in looking deeper and taking that deep breath when we sit down with them that we can build rapport that's going to take us where we want to go, and helping them maintain healthier, safer, and hopefully happier lives than they've been leading. So let's keep that in mind as we go. Now, when we go to meet Paul, it's easy to walk in with our own agenda, but I really think it's important to take that breath when you sit down with someone and feel like you're listening. Not that you're going in to say and to bump heads, but really to have a space of openness when you're dealing with people. So when we're meeting people in this situation, Paul, it's a good idea to refrain from calling him or others a hoarder. It carries a lot of stigma, and you might spark anxiety rather than comfort when you're doing that. And I want to remind you that hoarding disorder is a mental health diagnosis. Hoarding is a behavior. It's not an identity. Now, sometimes we meet people and they do say, "I am a hoarder," and they might really own that. That's okay. If someone self-refers, we totally let them keep that. I'm not about to argue with someone and say, "Oh, no, you don't want to call yourself that." It's really up to the individual. But for us, it's not about us putting that label on someone, because it really puts an arm's distance and pushes people away. So it's important to refrain from calling someone that word. I'd also urge you not to use that word in your offices, not to use that label, because it spreads. And we perpetuate stigma through doing that, even at the office cooler. And we want to get away from that. It's really important. How many of you know that hoarding disorder is 3 times more common than OCD? Has anyone heard that before? It's true. So we're raising awareness with these television shows, but the stigma is also raising, and we want to get away from that stigma so that we can help the people we're here for. So we also want to ask Paul what he's most happy about regarding his move. We're really trying to emphasize the positive here without thinking of all the problems that race in as we're doing our jobs. This is a new situation for Paul, and we want to welcome him to it. So get to know him a little bit. See, maybe he doesn't know what he's happy about. It can be scary. Like, it feels like it could be so great. He's getting his own space. That's exciting. It might also come with a lot of worries. We want to ask him what he's concerned about regarding his move. These are good things to bring out onto the table, to leave that open space for discussion. And I want you to know that what you're doing at this point is you're really setting the stage for success in your relationship building and all the efforts that you're going to need to put into the work that you're doing with Paul to help him maintain his new home. You're setting the stage there when you get in there with those first conversations. So that spirit is really important. Ask him what skills he has that will help him keeping in his new living environment safe and comfortable. Will he decorate it? Does he have ideas about what he wants to include and incorporate in this space? Emphasize his strengths rather than his deficits. Help him to find things that are going to be really positive for him in this new home. It's a real opportunity for a bright future for him, maybe something that he hasn't considered before. So it's up to you all, to all of us working with Paul and people like him, to help hold this vision for him of hope and positivity. It could be brand new, absolutely foreign, an absolutely new concept to him. So we're kind of the space keepers for this brightness in his life. Even if he can't see it for himself, We really need to come together to kind of hold this vision on the horizon to share with him. Provide him with a basic safety checklist so that he has an idea of expectations that he'll need to keep in mind as he's in his new apartment. Like I said, he might not have any idea of what's important or things that matter and how to organize it, but we're going to talk about all that as we go through. Now, reasons why changing and collecting saving behaviors might be especially difficult for Paul. The first one, it might not be his priority. That's really important to address. Now, I'm sure his life has been really complicated. There's a lot of noise going on maybe in his mind, the external and the internal forces. So he might not have been thinking about how the collecting and saving behaviors might need to change for this new opportunity. So it's up to us to help him see that it is a priority, to keep those in mind and make some changes. So you've got this opportunity to help him see this new way, this new path for himself. But change is probably going to be likely because he's been so used to doing things in a certain way. Sense of identity. He might be the guy on the street that everyone's come to for something, like, hey, do you have this, do you have that? He might be collecting for those kind of reasons, things that were positive, socially reinforced. So we want to acknowledge that. Strong attachments. I have a little story to tell you that you might not imagine when you first hear about it. Let's suppose you see someone and they have a bag of goldfish crackers, and you walk into their apartment and you think, oh, these are crumbly and stale trash, right? Not necessarily. For some people, they might have an attachment to that for a reason like it represents childhood. It might represent memories like my mom packed me those crackers for lunch. And at this stage, in his 50s, someone could feel like that's reminiscent of a home that they long for, something that doesn't feel like they can ever attain again. So I'm asking you to think about the kinds of attachments that people can have and not make assumptions. It's so easy to do that. So when you see things like that, instead of saying, hey, it's trash, it might be a good idea to say, what is this to you? And find out. Perfectionism. Perfectionism as relates to collecting is the fear of mistakes and missing opportunities. So someone might have a hard time letting things go or pass up because what if I lose it? What if I need it later? What if I'm back on the street? We have to let people know that sometimes we will make mistakes, but there will be other opportunities to come. And that big what if question is changing when someone gets into a unit for themselves, a new apartment. The things that applied before aren't necessarily the same, but that's not going to change in an instant mentally and emotionally. These are changes someone has to adapt to, so they take time. So I would expect that what if kind of question would be coming up because it's all new. We're asking someone to think about new things. So there's the fear when discarding items of letting something go that Paul might need later. And it's like, who are you to tell him that he's not going to need it? That can cause heart palpitations and real anxiety for someone to imagine being without something that they perceive that they could need again. So we have to bring it into realistic expectations and think about that with our people that we're helping. When considering an acquisition, is this something that I really need now in my new life? Or is this something that applied to before getting the apartment? You can you feel the huge thought change that's necessary? We think, oh, it's great, someone's getting into an apartment, how exciting, but there are so many questions that arise, and it's such a new state that it does take some easing into it. There is some difficulty with decision making that can happen for people with collecting and saving tendencies as well. Things can be overwhelming. Like I said, a lot of noise and what if and what's this good for? Do I need it or do I want it? Need and want is something that we have to help people parse out too. So the needs and wants change when someone moves into a unit. So that's something to be thought about. And you might be helping someone to figure out how they're making those new decisions and working with them to support that. Going for the short-term payoff can mean that someone is going to pick something up because it feels good in the moment to take it with the intent to keep it. And then it winds up in the house and it adds problems. So it's really not happy making in the long run. And also the short-term payoff is keeping things now because it feels so difficult to discard. It brings up such discomfort. And I want to tell you that when someone is faced with these feelings, with this strong relationship to items, it is a really strong, tangible feeling for people. We're not talking about people who just like stuff. We're talking about people who really feel it internally and are absolutely connected to their possessions. So is there an objective measure for clutter in a living space? There is, and it's called the Clutter Image Rating Scale. It shows images for kitchens, living rooms, and bedrooms. It's easily found online by Googling Clutter Image Rating Scale. And it's also published in Compulsive Hoarding and Acquiring, the Therapist's Guide by Gail Steckity and Randy Frost. Here's the images. So this is the kitchen, and the Clutter Image Rating Scale goes 1 through 9. And we'll show you this in a more in-depth one in a moment, but that's what the kitchen, it builds up. The living room, the bedroom. You've seen these, right? But guess what? There's hope. And that's what we're here to talk about today. You can see this, I hear it, I feel the reaction to it. But we can get through this. People do, and we can. So what we want to do is help Paul maintain his apartment at a level 3 or lower on the Clutter Image Rating Scale. Greater amounts of clutter than that result in health and safety hazards. So I'll show you how that adds up. Okay, here's level 1. Wouldn't it be great if we all had homes like that? We're not asking our clients to have that, though. We're not looking for house beautiful, right? We want house safe, house healthy. Okay, so here's 2. It's starting. It's still okay, right? All right. Level 3. Okay, I hear a lot of, like, woo, there's some foreshadowing in the room about what's going to come. All right. Now, I'm showing you this so that we can see how it stages up, so you can be aware, and hopefully we can get a handle on it. Not because I want to treat it like it's the hoarder's show. I really want to get away from that salacious oohing and eyeing feeling, because this is such a human experience for people. And people have been cast out like freaks or outliers when they have hoarding tendencies. But like I said, this is more normal, more common than we all give it credit for being. And, usually it's like someone's wacky aunt that's being spoken about, or the eccentric this or that person. These are real people. They're everyday people. And a hoarding disorder, it touches everyone. Socioeconomics, across the world, it's everywhere. So it is really common. So here's level 4. This is really where things are starting to get really difficult for people. You can see it's difficult. There's not space to sleep on the bed. It's piling up. People are starting to need to climb over things to get what they need now. And that's when it becomes tripping and fall hazards. Level 5, the space is not really functional. It's not used for what it's intended anymore at this stage. Level 6, yep. And also you see all the newspapers. It's a fire hazard, when we build up that kind of material in a home. Now, some of this is disorganization, too. So you'll see a little later how we can work on that. So it's piling up, you see, and it's common for things to build up along the walls more than the center. But it does. It builds up, and it does, and people still live that way, and they present, and you don't even know that their home is like that. But people do manage to have lives like we all do, even if it's piling up like that. So what will help Paul to keep his clutter at a level 3 or lower? Identifying his motivation. We want to talk to him about what he wants to get out of the space, how he wants to use it. Because if someone can identify that, then they might be able to keep it better as intended to be. Thinking through his decisions, again, that do I want it or do I need it kind of thinking comes in. And again, all new. Things that were in the past are past. Today it's like a brand new day that Paul gets to start. Reevaluating the worst case scenario when considering an acquisition or discard based on his new living arrangement and support services. You've all heard of the carrot and the stick, right? You introduce the combo of the reward, possibly followed by the punishment that could come. I think we're setting that aside now. I think of it, first of all, no one really wants a carrot, right? I think of it as the chocolate and the chocolate kind of proposal. Because what you want to do is help someone find the real positive reasons to keep this space the way it is meant to be. And that's not up to you or I how it's meant to be, but the safety is really an objective measure that we can talk about. But really tapping into what's going to make it work. And people like Paul who are just coming in off the street might not know because they've never been given that chance to think about it before. It's all brand new. So we want to help Paul develop new skills to make and maintain organization, comfort, and cleanliness. On the street, you don't have much opportunity maybe to do that, right? So you can see that this is a change that's being represented. And I kind of think that we're all in a position of offering someone training wheels in a way when we take this kind of case on and helping someone get into a new space. If we drop out right away, it's going to pile up. But if we're there like cheerleading and helping them maintain it and helping them keep that vision that's new, then we can really do a lot to serve Paul well. We want him to be able to practice his new skills with that support. So once we help him identify things that he wants, we can help him formulate strategies and organization systems to make it work. But on his own, where is he going to come up with the ways to do that? He's going to need some support there. All right, so now we're going to talk about moving in.
Okay. So Paul is your new client. We just been talking about him. He's finally been housed after being street homeless for the past 10 years. He's really been with you through the process. When you meet him, you notice how pleasant he is, how excited he is to be inside, and the large amount of belongings that he's brought with him. For the past year, he had been living in a safe haven where, due to space constraints, he had to put a lot of his belongings into a storage unit that he got some help paying for. So he wasn't able to sort of keep a lot of those things in the safe haven, so he wasn't allowed to have a lot of his belongings with him. While he was on the street, he was known to have a lot of shopping carts and large piles of belongings, and was a subject of cleanups on more than one occasion while he lived outside. So he was, maybe forced not to have his belongings with him when he was in the safe haven, and he was forced not to have his belongings with him when he was on the street. And he explained that now that he has a place of his own, he doesn't need the storage unit anymore. And over the past few days, brought all of his stuff to the apartment and closed out the storage unit.
Okay, so one of the things that we want to talk about is moving in. So we know that there has been a lot of stuff. Right under the mic, under the speaker there. Getting the feedback. We want feedback, right? Good feedback, not noisy feedback. So one of the things that we want to talk about with Paul is not only what he's bringing in, but where is it going to go? And it's really difficult to sort of visualize that in a new space if you've never lived that way. Any of us that moved into a new place for the first time, whether it was larger than the last place we were at or smaller, now we're going to right size. I've heard of downsizing and things like that. To me, downsizing is sort of negatively stated. It's like getting rid of. But right sizing is about like making the best use of the space. And really it's about keeping the best things that we have that fit in the space safely. So what we want to do is take a look at a process which is essentially finding homes for things. We found a home for Paul. Now where does he put his things? So an example here, you're going to maybe create a chart with people. And on the left side, you're going to have the things you own, maybe the categories of things you own, and where would they go? Now, in the past, you can see that Paul's bedding might have been rolled up and set on top of his cart every single day, you know. So this is the way he's organized it. So he might still have that mentality, like, when I wake up, I have to roll it up. But now, you know, we're going to be suggesting to Paul if he doesn't already suggest this himself, because we don't want to assume that people don't know anything. But maybe there's some pointers to set out here. You know, I've got arrows pointing to the right, so maybe bedding can go on the bed and an extra set of linens in the closet. So the idea here is that things have a bit more permanency. We're moving in, not just moving on. Now, when that's the experience on the street and somebody is constantly on the go, when all of your life is on wheels, you never have a chance to settle in. And so there might still be that fear, that concern, like it's almost like a fight or flight feeling of, I got to go, I need to be ready, just in case. So having that conversation with Paul about where might things go now is helpful. And the other reason it's helpful is because if you're saying, okay, so you're going to use the top, you know, part of your shelf here for the extra linens, what happens when that space is full? Now you know you've got as much as you have room for. And if you come across more of that category, either in the possessions you already have, you can say, would I rather keep this one or that one? And when Paul is out and he has the opportunity to acquire, maybe somebody's offering him a new, fresh blanket. In the past, this was an impulse like, thank you. What we're doing is we're giving an opportunity to slow that impulse down and say, well, where would I put it? Do I already have that? And so those were some of the decision-making skills that Becca was referring to, is actually slowing down that impulse because we have a new scenario. Maybe we don't need it as much as we thought we did. And if we do, maybe we can replace it with help. So when thinking about the different categories of items, it's said that, generally speaking, about any of us probably can identify about 30 categories of items that we own. What are a few of the categories of items that you have? What kinds of things do you accumulate? Clothes, books, shoes, bags, tote bags, anybody? Yeah, a lot of tote bags. That's another workshop. See you next year. Well, everybody tends to have the same things, but how much of those things? And what we're doing is taking a look really at what do you own, where does it go? So now Paul is thinking, you know, instead of going to get food maybe at a soup kitchen or something like that, he's actually storing it himself. So the idea is to develop this list with him and then have him suggest places to put it, because it may not be the same as where I would put it, but to see if it can be functional. So food, maybe it goes in the kitchen cabinets, in the fridge, and in the freezer. Now, we visited a small unit the last time we were in the city, and there isn't a whole lot of room for these things. You know, if there's a sale and it's 10 cans of soup for $10, a lot of people will go for that opportunity because you don't want to miss out. It was like this moment for me when I asked the store, and I said, can I get like 2 for $2? And they said, yes. I was like, okay, there's the marketing. So there's that, like, I can get it, I should get it, versus I should get it, where would I put it? So again, we're just kind of slowing down that impulse process. Toiletries. Now, a lot of folks don't have their own bathroom. So Paul might think, you know, toiletries, I'll just have them near the door so I can take them with me to the shared bathroom. Well, let's think of a more specific system so that things don't get scattered, so they're where you have them when you need them. How about a basket with a handle on the back of the door with a towel? That's something I've seen a lot of people do, and it's helpful. You know where it is. DVDs, VHS, CDs, books. Maybe there's a TV stand or on the shelves. We can start to think about how these things can be unpacked and put away. Kitchenware in the cabinets, the counter, the drawer. Furniture, where it will be used. Now, maybe when we're in a less safe environment, we're using things not just for comfort, but for safety. We might be thinking about, you know, if I position this chair here, it's keeping me safer because it's harder to get to me. You know, I'm on the other side of it when I'm sleeping. I have a sense of protection. And that's my feeling. If I go to sleep and there's something between me and the door, I feel better. But what if that's actually creating a different kind of hazard that I'm not perceiving? And so when we're talking about putting things where they're going to be used, this is something that might be a conversation, or Paul might say, in the corner with the lamp. You go, okay, great, that'll work. But just, I think always that sort of that trauma lens that a lot of us look through when we're doing these things, wondering, well, it's not strange. It's actually pretty smart to use these things as a barrier. But now, are they actually a barrier to your safety or your housing stability? Electronics, cords in the drawer, devices set up to use. Think about where he might have been keeping these things before. Important papers. This is something that I think a lot of those of us who don't live on the street, we often think of like the shopping carts, and when we think of the clean out, it's like everything is gone again and again and again. But where's the birth certificate? Where's the ID? Where are these important things? And so actually, maybe there's a safe deposit box, or there are hanging files in the desk. Clothing hanging in a closet or folded in drawers. Now, we're in an area where that's tough. I mean, we have seasons. So it's very easy to fill up your wardrobe with just one season's worth of clothes. So sometimes people have to be creative about what they're able to keep and where they're going to keep it. Sometimes people have a storage unit, as you know, in addition to their unit. But it's how you use it that's going to matter the most. Sentimental items and photos, actually getting to take them out and display them and enjoy them. Again, like feeling at home. And let's just, for the sake of simplicity, assume that it's single stream recycling. So all of the plastic, the paper, all these cans, they're all going together. And so, Paul, where would you keep them? Well, usually I bag them and I have a cart, and then I fill another bag and I put them on the cart and I take them with me. It's like a bank account. Now we're in a new situation, and that's something that we're going to reflect on in the next scenario. But what happens when you've filled that space? Now we know that Paul is an artist as well, and he values his things, his art supplies, the art that he's done. But where is that going to go? I'm thinking about a very small unit, even a larger unit, even like how I've lived. I had space, but regardless of the amount of space we have, it's like the amount of money we have. We tend to fill or use the same percentage, right? And so it's not the size of the place that's the issue. It's the way people are using it. And even if Paul had a mansion, he would probably still fill it to the same capacity. So we're right-sizing. But this is difficult because he's got completed art projects. You might say, well, I'll keep them in my apartment. But where? Right now you've got the kitchen things in the kitchen, the clothes in the closet. You start to see how this idea of need and want becomes a little fuzzy. Maybe he wants to keep the things in the common spaces at the supportive housing area that he's at. Is that allowed? Now, it's one thing to have the completed art, but what about the art supplies? How many of you are artists? Creatives? Are you, really? That's it? How many of you don't admit it because you don't think you were worth it? You're all, I mean, come on. If you do a doodle, you're an artist, okay? You're awesome. Now, if you're a multimedia artist like Paul, gathering things and using them, maybe you've got paints and canvas and paper and the found art supplies and frames and adhesives and a whole big pile of etc. Over here, you can see that, there will be a need for further discussion about this category. When discussing his artwork, Paul is very positive and proud. Weighing the need and the want is very important. But what about when the items relate to not just income, but also self-expression and ultimately identity? So that's something that I really needed to face myself when I was using the space and having a struggle. If I let these things go, do I let myself go? So Becca was talking earlier about having sort of a basic safety checklist, because it's one thing to bring the things in, but where can and can't I place them? So he may benefit from having this basic safety checklist. So knowing that the entrances and the exits must be accessible and doors can open completely, including the closets. I used to think the closets was ridiculous. It's not. They might need to be searched. If there's a fire, the firefighters need to be able to check and see if anyone is hiding in there. So that's one reason why the closets need to be accessible. The doors need to swing all the way open. If somebody breaks their ankle. They need to be carried out. They need to be on a gurney. That's why the doors need to swing open, and that's why the pathways throughout the apartment need to be 3 feet wide. That, for me, feels like an awkward, uncomfortable conversation. When I talk about the reason why paths are 3 feet wide, it's not arbitrary. It's like because if there was an emergency and we needed to bring in a gurney, it's not a happy day. But believe me, we'll be glad that we can do it if we need it. Combustible materials away from heat sources and electrical outlets, like Becca was pointing out the newspapers. The ability to use his bed, the bathroom, and the kitchen. These are all basic safety items that are going to be noticed by housing authority. Now, what if you've never had your own bathtub, for example? Seems like a good storage space, because where else you can get a shower if you need it. So people are creative with the way they use the space. We all are. I used to keep my stereo in the kitchen cabinet, but that's not where somebody else might advise me to put it. But if I'm going to get in the way of something that impedes my health and safety, I have to have that conversation. Making sure that the smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors are working and unobstructed and nothing hanging on the sprinkler heads, right? And that there's no accumulation of spoiled food or refuse. Again, that can be really difficult because if you've been hungry and you have food, even if it's kind of starting to turn, it's hard to let that go. And I think that a lot of what I've experienced with folks is a sense of survivor's guilt. Like, why should I have this apartment? My friends are out there. They're hot in the summer. They're cold in the winter. I have an excess, and I feel bad about the way I'm using it or about discarding food. And so it's kind of recalibrating to this new experience. And if there's a ton of food available, only bringing back what you need right now because you actually have a refrigerator. And so this rethinking, that's not going to come automatically, but I think incrementally with that support and saying, it makes sense. It makes sense that this is happening. So that idea of helping someone develop categories and specific places to put those things might be a real game changer. Okay. We are going to have time for questions and answers at the end, so we can go a little deeper into this. So make a note, we'll come back.
Okay, so Paul's been living in the building about 18 months now. So he's been getting more comfortable staying inside because of your stellar work with him. He's getting a lot of his needs addressed. He's seeing a psychiatrist, he's seeing a doctor for his high blood pressure. So all in all, he's doing pretty well. While doing routine apartment inspections, you notice that the apartment is completely filled with a lot of stuff. He's not using the bed because of the various bags of cans and bottles that are stacked to the ceiling. And it's starting from the head of the bed. And he has parts of old computers and scrap metal laying around, and you notice some old furniture back against the windows. The tub is also full of newspapers. You're really not sure how he moves around the apartment, and you become very, very concerned for his safety. So because you have a great rapport, you bring this up with him. You mention that you've got this concern and that there's a fire, that these conditions are creating a fire hazard. He doesn't seem fazed by it. He states that all of this stuff is temporary. It's going to get sold by him, whether he's going to sell the bottles and cans or he's going to create art with it and sell it. He really says that he believes that there's a ton of money sitting there and not to worry about it. So then you suggest maybe throwing some of it out. His demeanor immediately changes. He becomes agitated and says, "Would you throw a $100 bill into the trash?"
All right, it's filling up. And you're walking in, are you remembering what the Dalai Lama said? That spirit of openness and relating, thinking about what we have in common, it's really important because it's tense. This is not easy. And you have an agenda, you have inspections to meet, things need to happen. So let's think about what we can do here. You can see the cans do pile. You can notice that people can't get into their cabinets, their closets anymore, and a lot of climbing is going to happen. Then we've got the furniture that's ripped. That could be bringing its own problems in. There could be nails sticking out that you're worried Paul's going to have to climb over and things like that. would you throw the bill into the trash? And picture this, you've got a $100 bill. Forget about just throwing it into the trash. Think about tearing it up and throwing it out. I mean, like we all recoil from that kind of idea, right? But that's the kind of feeling that Paul might be associating with this getting rid of things that we're all so often talking about. Get rid of this, discard that, throw it out. That's the language that's always floating around. But really what we want to do here is talk about harm reduction and think about how Paul can save the things that really matter and make use of the things to suit him in a healthy way. So let's look at how we can do that. So you've probably heard of harm reduction when it comes to drug usage and making things safe for people. We're kind of applying that thinking here and making it work for Paul. So, for example, how can he reduce the can-related hazards? Now, I also want to tell you, keeping can also happen for reasons other than hoarding disorder, and I think that's really important to keep in mind. I just want to interject this here. Sometimes people are keeping things because depression might prevent them from acting upon it and actually taking things where they need to go. Ailments, maybe someone who was able, maybe Paul could get the things up to his apartment, but he can't get them back down to go out. So sometimes there's a little more detective work in a really friendly, human, client-centered, person-centered approach to take. So it's not just what it appears. So I really want to emphasize, like, think about that and see what it is for Paul. So here, we know he's an artist, and our tendency, I think, all of us, especially in the helping professions, is to have answers for people. But what we want to do to make it work is solicit ideas from Paul before we offer strategies. Maybe in your personal life you can relate. You've come home, you wanted to share with a friend or a partner, like, what happened, and they already start saying, well, this is what you should do, and here you go. And it's like, whoa, I just wanted to share and explore. So it's good to kind of think that approach through when you're working with Paul and see what his ideas are for working on these things. You've heard he's an artist and inclined to saving things to make things with. So you want to not step on his values. You want to find a way to incorporate them into the work you're doing together to ensure that he has this great housing that's going to stay viable for him. So owner-generated solutions are likely to be more sustainable than if you come in with an agenda and say, this is what you need to do. If you're on the same page as a team, like bonded together with this vision, you're going to get more buy-in and more cooperation than if you're asserting something onto Paul's agenda. So we want to avoid assumptions about the degree of attachment to the items as well as the orientation to the attachment. Now, you might also think that he is more attached to some things than he is. Those assumptions are not going to make this work. So again, open-ended, polite, friendly questions, compassionate questions can really take you further as you go along in this process. Are the cans worth money because they can be recycled? Is that what they represent? Are they art objects? It's good to find out. And also find ways that he can recycle them that mesh with his lifestyle. Maybe there's a certain path he likes to travel around the city. Are there places to deposit those cans that feature in his route? That's something you can incorporate and make it personalized solutions for him. Are they being saved for an art project? We might think, oh, there's no way he's going to do anything with that. Let's not make an assumption. Let's not limit people. Let's give people that benefit of the doubt and encouragement to actually use these items where they might not have been able to before, where everyone else has said, you're not going to do it. If we hear an inkling like there's a project in mind, if we can support that, that's going to be better for the relationship and for his housing if he's actually using those materials in a functional way. That's what we want. So this artist, a Nigerian artist, El Natsui, displayed his art made of discarded cans at a gallery in 2015 in upstate New York. And I wonder if his family and friends were like, what are you doing with all those cans? They need to go. He did. He created something fantastic with it, and that can be done. And it might be on a much smaller scale, but it's still to be valued if that's someone's identity as an artist. So harm reduction approaches, if the cans are for earning income from recycling, suggest a drop-off schedule that's more frequent to avoid a pileup. If Paul is unwilling to recycle items before returning to his home, suggest a certain amount of space in his unit that can be dedicated to this collection. And try to be realistic with him. Talk to him. The whole apartment would be much less functional and much less happy a space, probably, if it was filled with cans, if he has other things he wants to do. So maybe discuss, like, there's a bin, it's this size, for example, yay high. Fill that up. Like, that makes it practical for him so he can see it, rather than just this amorphous idea. You got to bring it home and make it real. Suggest bringing items to a recycling center before the scheduled drop-off time if the designated space is full early. Now, sometimes people have said, you know what, I really just want to feel like I have a certain amount before I bring it in. There's something like a comfort level. Maybe they have an idea of a number that feels right to them for whatever reason, or a size bin. But we're trying to make this a practical, functional scale that really is workable, amounts that he can bring safely, that aren't overwhelming. And again, it can take getting used to this, because Paul's been in survival, like adaptive mode, for I don't know how many years. So again, it's like adjusting. And I really love the word that Lee used, that calibration, that recalibration of thought. I think that's important to remember. So discuss the importance of cleaning any contaminated items that he's bringing inside. That will reduce the harm. That's a really great harm reduction strategy. Wash them out. Then you're not going to get the bugs developing. Then also you're not going to have the sugar residue creating tracks in the floor. And then what happens when that starts? Then the newspaper that was there, now that's getting stuck. And you can imagine how the levels of harm are building if just the can is not rinsed out. Like, it just really trails into further hazards. But that's one really easy way of reducing the harm that oftentimes people don't think about. They just pile it up. But doing that one little thing, rinsing them out, cleaning them off so there is no spillage, so there's not that leftover, that's going to change things. Washing it so it doesn't attract bugs. So harm reduction approaches to reducing furniture-related hazards. Ask if he has what he needs or if he's gathering the items for a different purpose. For example, what if he's still collecting tarps, plastic that he finds, leftovers, because he needed to protect his items from the weather or from other people? That's not necessary anymore, so that conversation can be really good. Now, it's one thing if you say, hey, you don't need that anymore. You're not on the street. What do you need that plastic for? It's another thing to approach it in a more gentle fashion. There's a real difference in the attitude and tone. Your tone matters. Your facial expressions matter. They don't sound like practical strategies, but believe me, they really are. It really counts how you approach it. Even if you're saying the same thing, there's a different spirit to it, and you go much farther that way. Point out that these items are more likely than others to contain bed bugs, and how he can examine them before bringing them inside. Fabric items can collect bugs, and oftentimes people don't even know that the bugs are in there. Inside the wood, these are things to point out, because he might not even know. I mean, what does Paul know about how bed bugs live? What did I know before doing the research with this work? So it's about making it real and explaining things that might seem obvious to you, but aren't to someone that has been living on the street. Show Paul how to position his furniture in a safe manner if he's planning to keep it, so that it can be useful, functional, and safe, so he doesn't have to do that climbing that can lead to getting hurt, or that piling up of things. We want to help him make the most of his important possessions so that he doesn't end up losing things in another cleanup. And rather than posing it as a consequence, again, we're framing it as an opportunity to break the cycle. And sometimes people have a tendency to self-sabotage too. I don't know if you can relate to this. You might not even realize it. Paul might not even realize it. He might not be feeling hope inside that he can keep this apartment. he might never have had anyone imagine that he could have this apartment. And so there are ways that we sabotage our results if we don't have that support. But just keep that light shining to show him these are the reasons why you should work on it, because you want to keep it good for yourself. And you can do it. People can do this. But the overwhelming reaction, I think, when people haven't had that experience is, I can't do it, haven't been able to, no one's had the faith. But it's a new day, you're all here because you're interested in doing this. And I think it's really important to bring that back, that you can do it. People do better, and you can, and we have faith and we believe in you. But here's a list of the things that you need to do to keep it that way. All right.
Okay, so a little bit of time has passed. The building has had several reports of bed bugs, and specialized inspections have started to take place in an attempt to get a handle on the situation, because at this point there's a lot of reports of bed bugs, and they all seem to be coming from a similar area in the building. It gets time to inspect Paul's apartment. He comes to the door, kind of cracks it open, pokes his head out, and he has a lot of bites on his arms. You can see what looks like bites on his arms. And you ask him if he's noticed any bed bugs in his unit. He says that he isn't sure, but he's not comfortable allowing you or the exterminator inside his unit to see. He mentions that he's going to just be told to throw everything out and that he won't do it. After a lot of conversation, Paul allows the exterminator into the unit, who immediately finds a bed bug issue amongst his belongings, and Paul panics.
So from our perspective, what we're going to kind of focus on is that fear, the fear that he's going to have to let everything go. And so what we want to do is talk about empowering him to help, again, break the cycle, to avoid that re-traumatization, and to set the whole thing back, and also to really reinforce those fears. So what can he do to avoid that re-traumatization? Report his concern. So we were kind of talking about the intake process when somebody's actually moving into a unit or a group home, any kind of new living situation. What kind of conversation is had about bed bugs? A situation like this that is very common. Are folks told, if you report this, the sooner you do it, the sooner we can help, and it's not going to be a penalty. Like, this happens, it's not your fault. But if we don't know about it, we can't do anything about it. So sort of encouraging that as a positive, you can report this to us. It's okay. So something he can be doing, anybody can be doing, is vacuuming on a regular basis, and then bag the contents and dispose of them immediately. And again, this isn't taking the bag and keeping it in the unit, but maybe this goes out to a dumpster. So this is something that people can do regularly for upkeep, but also if someone notices them, this is part of the work that they can do to alleviate the situation. It doesn't make it go away. You're never going to get all of them, but some is better than none. Gather all the clothes and linens in plastic bags, and then launder the clothes and bedding on a high temperature setting. Throw away the bags in the dumpster. So we're not washing the clothes in the bags, but we're dumping them in as hot as they can go, and let them go. And this is, again, that fear that Paul had about, I'm going to have to get rid of all my stuff. It's like, this is how you can save your stuff. Because a real knee-jerk reaction a lot of times is to either panic and throw it away, or just not tell anybody and hold on to it. Freeze the items that won't be damaged. So around 0 degrees for about 4 days will kill the bed bugs. And items that aren't going to be hurt by the freezer could be helped, right? So there may be some things that he can save. And just knowing that there are some things he can do on his own, maybe before he sort of plucks up the courage to report this, is going to be helpful. Pull the clutter out from under the bed and other places where bed bugs hide. So we were talking before about finding homes for things. When we're talking to Paul and he says, well, I think what I'll do is I'll keep my papers, my artwork and papers, I can fit them under the bed. It's great because when you've got like big poster size art, it's a really good place to put them because you're not going to crunch it up. However, there might be this consequence, and it doesn't mean it's going to make the bed bugs happen, but it's a lot harder to eradicate them if the clutter is jammed into these places where they tend to be. So what shouldn't Paul do? He needn't panic and throw away items. They may be salvageable. So one of the things that we often experience is people like throw away the mattress and do all these things. And this can actually be spreading the problem rather than making it go away. He shouldn't move things to other places, bring it down the hall, or even move it from room to room, because they can be contained. And so that can help stop the spread of them. You're not just hiding them. He shouldn't use poisons directly on his body. And this is something that people might do. If you're getting bitten by bugs, we put on mosquito spray, but imagine putting on like agricultural strength chemicals. People get hurt internally, externally. So there might be this impulse like, before I go to bed, I'm going to put this powder on. But that's not what it's meant for. So people can get more hurt by doing these things. He shouldn't try to treat the space with insecticides himself. This is something that a lot of people will do. Go out to the store, buy the products that says bed bug poison on it, and bring it home and try to use it themselves. Lots of people do that because you want to try to do it yourself before somebody else comes in. But again, it could be harmful to him and it may not help. And he shouldn't use rubbing alcohol, kerosene, or gasoline to try to kill them, right? And these are all, in a way, reasonable reactions and things that people might do. They're just trying to make it better. However, I think a little bit of education can go a long way. So that real initial concern that Paul had of, I don't want to open the door, I don't want to let you in because you're going to throw away all my stuff. Like having that message that bed bugs don't equal getting rid of all your things. That's almost like worth having a poster in the hallway to say that. Like, tell us about it, we'll do something about it. But don't throw away your stuff yet. Like, we can deal with this. And I understand from talking with Christine, it's often a step-by-step process. And people can live in the unit while it's being done. Now, some of the ways that it's, taken care of on a professional level, the unit is heated to 150 degrees for several hours. That chocolate you were talking about? Yeah. Eat the chocolate, okay? Because there are going to be things in the apartment that are affected by heat. You can imagine what might happen. So there'd probably be some sort of education around that, but there are units that can be heated 150 degrees for about 8 hours, and that will kill the bed bugs. But it doesn't keep the bed bugs gone. It kills what's there, but it doesn't stop them from coming back. For that, there needs to be a series of pesticides used, and this does reduce the likelihood of immediate reinfestation. So, you'll see that the seams along the walls, holes and things like that are treated, furniture is treated so that they're dead and they hopefully stay out. So these are a couple of the ways that the bed bugs are treated, and I'm feeling a lot less concerned about all my things being thrown away when I get a little bit more education about it. When Christine was sort of setting up what the day was going to look like and she mentioned the bed bugs, it sounded like, I don't know, an episode of Springer in here, like we're going to have some kind of big event. But no, it's like we all have that reaction because there's also the concern, what if I'm in there and I'm bringing them home with me? Or, what's going on? So a little bit of education here can go a long way. Okay. I'm still here. I'm looking over there like, no, stay where you are. So at this point, we are taking a look at where these strategies came from. If you've seen me speak in the past, you've heard about the Buried in Treasures workshop. So this is a self-help group for people who have too much stuff. Now, maybe Paul has clinical hoarding disorder. Maybe he doesn't. People that need help, though, reducing the clutter can often benefit from a group like this because they're coming in, they're getting the education, and the education brings you empowerment. And when you have the peer support, you have the sense that you can do this and you're not alone. So the Buried in Treasures workshop is where really all of these strategies come from. Now, what happens in Buried in Treasures? So the group members meet others who want to reduce their acquiring, saving, and disorganization. So you can hear how these might be helpful for people that are experiencing that, especially if they're just moving in. They learn and share skills that make this goal possible in a judgment-free space. You've heard that sort of refrain a couple of times today, withholding that judgment, creating the opportunity. Challenging beliefs about attachments to things. Challenging the belief about the need to acquire new things. Finding motivation for change, and keeping our eyes on the prize. So the Buried in Treasures workshop, it's 16 sessions, 2 hours each. We understand that that's not always possible to run in the settings that you're at. Maybe the people you're working with aren't there that long. Maybe it's more of a touch and go kind of an interaction, and you want to be able to use these tools in the moment. That's why we kind of broke them out to share with you today, so that you didn't feel like for people to get some of the benefit from this group that they had to come to this group. Now, Christine is going to talk about her experience running this in one of the homes around here and tell you what that was actually like. I can say that as one of the people that helped develop this program, it was a game changer for me. I had real life consequences on the line. I had my relationship on the line. I had my finances on the line. I had the safety of my home on the line. I had the safety and well-being of our cat Honeybee on the line. There was a lot of motivation for change here. But I had absolutely no idea how to actually do it until I got exposed to this book. And this book is what we turned into this group. And it is evidence-based. We have run studies across the country, including here at Columbia University, and run the groups around the world as far as Australia. And it's helping people. But again, we want to, in a way, right-size these skills so that they can be delivered wherever and whenever you're doing your job. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, so, it was a great experience being able to run this group. I think that, the struggles that I think we all have running groups with our population still applied, but what was a major takeaway was the culture shift in the building. I think by having a group and advertising a group around this issue, sort of normalized it a little bit. It allowed for people to talk about it more. It gave some space for workers to have a tangible tool, something that they could actually talk about with their client. So that was very, very impactful. We did some shifting to the group structure. So we worked closely with Randy, who's one of the developers of the group, and we know that our clients sometimes can't handle a 2-hour session, right? So we reduced down to an hour. So you had mentioned it was 16. I think we ended up with, I want to say 24-ish. We had a couple of no-shows, but it was around 24 sessions. So it was a longer period of time, but shorter amounts. I could tell you one woman went from being close to going into eviction proceedings. She actually really took this and ran with it and did a great job. She actually had her daughter come in from Georgia and actually had her help her really go through everything, organize her belongings. So it was very, very impactful for her. And I think that the ability for our clients to come together around anything, especially something that they're struggling with, is so huge and so corrective for all of them, and so impactful. And that was our experience running this, was that people really were able to support each other and really be there. And I think that the building in general approaches this differently now, and I know that those clients and the staff all utilize these tools when dealing with this issue and thinking about major deep cleans. So that was a big thing too, is thinking about that.
Can I just ask, what was it like facilitating this group, being a part of on that end of the equation?
Yeah, I think that we can all, I think when we work with our clients, we're all human, so we obviously all can relate to our clients on a human level. We may or may not have had some similar issues. We may or may not have dealt with a mental health issue. We may or may not have had a substance abuse issue in our lives. We all have stuff. We all sometimes maybe have too much of it. Sometimes we have clutter. So I think that there is a piece of this that allows for some, maintaining obviously an appropriate boundary, but some vulnerability from the part of the facilitators where, maybe a lot of the other groups we've run, we may not have done that because, this is just so human. This is your home, right? This isn't just as simple as, and I'm not suggesting that saying like don't drink is simple, but like you could say don't drink, right? You can't say don't have anything. You can't live with nothing. So that human piece I think was really, really important, and the ability to self-disclose in a professional way was a difference, I think, running this group versus running other groups.
Yeah, thanks. And I think that something that's helpful too is that sort of idea, that human spirit. You might be running a group of one, essentially, when you're working with somebody, and the same skills that apply in a larger setting can apply just as well in that moment with an individual.
One of the things that I most loved about what's contained in Buried in Treasures, and you don't need to be running a group per se to have people experience this with you, but it explains the reasons that people have challenges with finding and keeping items. And I think that when people are thinking about this for themselves, there's a tendency to, I'm a freak, I'm a mess, and all this negative talk. And what they find when we look at it through this lens is, oh, I'm keeping things because I'm afraid that if I get rid of this, I'll lose the memories that go with it. I won't have the experience of that thing that I did with my family when I was little if I get rid of the object. Also, I will forget that I own, these glasses if I don't have them out in sight. And we talk about the ideas behind memory and how people's memories are better than we feel that they are. Research has shown ideas about identity. It's not what you own, it's who you are and what you're doing with it. All these other reasons that people are keeping things become really insightful, and people go, oh my gosh, now I get why I have such trouble letting these things go. And when people come together like that and get insight, it's like, okay, I'm not a bad person. I just am making sense of my life in these ways that aren't really helpful to me. So it's really good for people to be able to see that.
Yep. So this might be a helpful book to pick up. And we also offer a free facilitator guide through our website. If you get in touch with us, we'll send it to you because it's got a lot of the sort of the background and the information that we're sharing. And in addition to being a self-help book, it's really also a helper book because in this book there are breakouts for family and friends that are supporting people. So one final consideration, is there another tenant who would like to mentor Paul as he gets used to his new living arrangements? Is there a program in place for this? How many of you have a program like that in place where people can mentor people and support them as they're moving in or if they're struggling? Do you have that in place? No? Okay. Because I think one of the really exciting things I saw, I was walking down the hallway and I saw a sign. It just said, floor liaison. And it was just this person living on the floor that had been there, felt confident, well-established, had good people skills. And as people were moving in, could kind of show them the ropes. And if people were struggling, could kind of give them support. How do you use this space? Like from someone who gets it really personally, to be able to have that resource on hand. The ways that people can help each other after we leave, that's a part of the solution too. So it is something to consider. And one more thing, of course, the Fair Housing Act. So are you familiar with the protections afforded by the Fair Housing Act for people with clutter? Okay, well, this is just in the last few years since it went into the DSM, since hoarding disorder became an actual diagnosis. So people with clutter can sometimes receive reasonable accommodations, give them more time to bring their home up to safety standards, right? Because our job is to help people keep their housing. On the other end, it can feel like you people are just trying to kick us out. That's not the case. We're working really hard to help people be safe and comfortable in their homes. So having some support from the Fair Housing Act means that you might actually have more time to work on that. So whether or not someone sees themselves as having hoarding disorder clinically and being in recovery, or it's just recognized that it's not a lifestyle choice, but it's something that they're willing to work on. That can buy some more time. It's not a guarantee, but it might be helpful. And so you can see the website there, www.1.nyc.gov, is a place to go, and you can find access for that. Question time. Yes?
I had a question about...
I'm sorry. So this microphone is actually on in the middle of the room here, and if you're soft-spoken, like if you can come to the microphone, that would be... Okay. All right.
So thanks so much. So in terms of running suggestions for running a very good measure, I'm wondering, A, how to advertise it best, because like even if someone has a tiny bit of clutter, that person will come as well, I hope and assume. And then so advertising suggestions in terms of actually wording and how to frame it when you explain to clients. And then do you think it's fine to do preemptively, like just because I'm opening up a new building? So why not just have it right away, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Let me just mention, so what we actually did when we kicked this group off, again, everyone can probably relate to having difficulties getting groups off the ground or getting a higher, a decent attendance rate. So we actually had an open house, if you guys remember that.
Mm-hmm.
We had an open house where we sort of advertised sort of like I don't remember if it says, did your apartment look like this? Or it said, do you have a lot of stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of how we left it. And we had these I think they were cool looking flyers that just were like lots of books. And it was lots of stuff in a given room. And so we posted that all over the place. And we had a pretty good turnout. Lee actually came to that. But the open, and just in general, I'm a big fan of having like open houses and sort of like meet and greets for the beginnings of groups. I think it's a very not intense and a less confrontational way for clients that are a little bit nervous or ambivalent about joining a group. It's a very safe way to figure out if you're interested or not. So that was one way that we did that.
Yeah, and the flyers are really important. The language as well as the imagery, something that we really spend a lot of time being mindful of is, what does it look like? And actually the image on that flyer was an image from one of the staff people's like living rooms. It was his book collection. And so we can show the sort of after picture, what people might want it to look like. They know what it does look like, but it's like, I love books. I could have books. Okay, I'll go to that. And so it was like, is stuff a problem? Do you have too much stuff? So it wasn't like, are you a hoarder? No. Because, I don't call myself that. I call myself a finder-keeper, excessive finder-keeper in recovery. I'm a retro video game fan. I'm a space invader, okay? I'm a Pac-Man.
Yep.
All these different ways of talking about it. These can be featured on your flyer, but essentially it's like, here's help, created by and for people who have too much stuff. And I think what was helpful about the open house model was that I am just one more person who has worked through it myself, and I'm familiar with the group. So if there's someone from another place that's graduated out of a group, maybe you talk to Christine, maybe there's somebody that's able to step up and say, yeah, here's how it was helpful, have that kind of an event. But I think the imagery and the language on the flyers themselves are really important. We just put up flyers because we're going to be starting a group soon, and it had an image of the book, but then it just said, do you have too much stuff? Is stuff a problem for you? There's help for that. So it does. It gives people hope, and it doesn't look like you think I'm dirty or ugly or something. That's the assumption. So, yeah.
What type of tangible resources are available for folks who have excessive collecting and savior behavior? See, I'm not using the word hoard.
Thank you. I love it.
Rock star in the front.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
But I mean, the issue is that, even if you have, an extreme case where you have to go through APS and, you may get through that process, which is a very lengthy process. And then when they come in and, and the unit is cleaned or whatever, but then it returns because, of course, we haven't done anything to address the behavior because, first of all, it's very exhausting
No, I don't know of any, but I know that we have some through Buried in Treasures, and you might be able to speak to some general ones.
Yeah, I think one thing that we find is sometimes a clean out is necessary. It's a crisis that needs to happen, at least to bring it back up to zero.
Yeah.
What happens then? So maybe there's an education support group like Buried in Treasures. Maybe there's peer support going on. But the idea is it costs thousands of dollars to do one of these cleanouts, right? Like 10,000, 15 more, depends what's in there. And then we think about the cost of running one of these groups or something like that, to actually have them running in a unit, in a building. When people show up, it's part of the culture. It's like a lot of people have a lot of stuff. We have something called the Finder Keeper Workshop. People come in for an hour. They set small weekly goals. They talk about a skill. And so that's something that's kind of self-sustaining. When it comes to having sort of intervention in the units themselves, like if we look up help for hoarding disorder or hoarding, it's like, here's SteriClean, you know? But that's been something that we've been working with the city to take a look at. There's something called the peer response team out in San Francisco that we helped set up. And these are folks with lived experience of clutter that are trained to help their peers. So in the Bay Area, they work for the Mental Health Association of San Francisco. Calls will come into them and they can respond. And when they go out to help someone in the community, it's generally a clinician and a peer that go together. So there's that initial interaction. Maybe it's a housing specialist if it's not a clinician. And essentially that connection is made. And then there can be some ongoing support. So whether it's instead of or in addition to one of these crisis cleanouts, that can be helpful. But where does the money come from for that? That's why we're advocating for that to become a part of, you know, the budget for New York City. That's something that we've been working on for 6 years now, since we did the study at Columbia University. And 6 years is like a lot of time, and it's absolutely nothing at the same time. But the more people that are a part of this conversation, the more likely we are to make it happen.
I have one thing just to add that I thought of that was useful for us was organization classes. We called them organization classes. This was separate from Buried in Treasures. This was just some tips. I think there's this separation with the formerly homeless population. Like, is it this excessive acquiring, or is it maybe I just don't know how to keep a home, you know, and where do the two kind of come together? So something that was helpful for some people was to do organization classes where they can sort of just go step by step and just organizing certain parts of their apartment, and then staff would actually go in and help them. That's something tangible that you can work on maybe post clean out, right? Or that you can sort of help keep someone on track. But again, like we were talking about, the number one most important thing is maintaining a good relationship with the client as much as you can. Clean out sometimes can also like torch your relationship with the client. So something to think about is, you know, can someone else be in charge of that instead of the person's primary worker? You know, can a supervisor maybe be in charge of the clean out portion versus their primary worker, so that primary worker can then partner with them to do some of the stuff afterwards, so that, you know, they can be mad at the supervisor, but maybe they can be cool still with their worker, so that they can help them. Yeah.
I've heard staff say that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's a question here. Yep.
Yeah, I understand hoarding is now in the DSM-5.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
What is the implication of that for mental health intervention or funded mental health intervention in New York City, New York State?
Right, so across the country, the question was, now that hoarding disorder is listed in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for mental health conditions, what is the implication? The implication is there's a couple-fold here. A, people can actually bill, therapists and clinicians can bill for that service specifically. So people coming in don't have to come in with, with a clutter challenge, but they're coding for depression, or they're treating for OCD because that's what it was thought to be. That's maybe the biggest thing, is that there's a shift in thinking about where is the problem under the surface. And moving away from thinking that hoarding disorder is a symptom of obsessive compulsive disorder, but recognizing that it's really a separate challenge for a lot of us. And so the treatment becomes more tailored to the individual's needs, as well as the ability to bill for those services. So it's a real game changer. And then when we look at the protections that people are afforded because of it, that's really important too.
I would like to just mention that in Massachusetts, I'm happy to announce that just a week ago we got word that our governor, Charlie Baker, has signed a proclamation stating that we will have 1 week in May from now on as Hoarding Disorder Awareness Week. We're really excited about that because we're hoping that can lead to greater awareness campaigns and greater funding to help people. And the workshops, they really don't cost anything besides the books and someone to staff a room or 2 people. We like co-facilitators to do it together. But the cost is minimal if you work from this kind of way. But it's getting the states to fund these kind of missions that's really important. And that takes people power. So maybe you can write to your governor and get together en masse and get things like this out to people.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
A lot of the interventions that you talk about seem to happen, in a group setting or with an open house, Christine, like you talked about at the supportive housing unit. I've had a lot of failed interventions with clients, and kind of seeing me literally at the shutting of the door. You can't come in here. They've had apartment people come to, inspect the apartment. And I'm wondering if it's purposeful when you talk about, these meetings to do it outside of the space itself. If there's any, if you've noticed any effectiveness with having some of the tough conversations in a different space, or if it's important to be in that environment when you're talking.
Totally get out of the space. Yeah. In terms of, I think that the thing to think about is, like I was saying, I know that the relationship gets torched, and being a supportive housing worker, there's a lot of things that you have to do, right? But you are still trying to serve this client that is accessing services voluntarily often. So it's this weird dance that you're kind of always in the middle of. Yes, get out of the space and maybe don't talk about it. Talk about other things and become. Repair the relationship. I think that in my experience, the way to get someone to not do something is to talk about it a lot. We've had this similar situation where someone had, I had a person once that had built, really, really talented man. Built like this massive structure. He could only open his door like this much. And it was so bad, and he ended up getting injured, and it was a whole situation, and he was so angry, right? He was so angry that the building had to take that down to get him out, and he was so upset about it that he didn't want to talk to anyone for a really long time. And the only way that we were able to sort of get back in, this person also had a lot of medical conditions. This was a person that we really needed to sort of be with and work with, was to not talk about it at all, just to start off by maybe bringing him a cup of coffee, inviting him to an event downstairs. If he was creative, we had to have a very good art therapist, trying to get him to do stuff like that, inviting him for a walk, like anything to get him out of the space. And when I say space, I also mean head space of being so angry. Mm-hmm. Definitely, yes. I mean, definitely.
And then measuring progress, is that the self-report of the person that you're working with? Or do you kind of make time to go up and check on 1 through 9 together?
I think it's going to depend. In my experience, I think it's going to depend on the client. I think you work with what you've got. So if the client is open to that, some people I've worked with have been really into being held accountable. So they want you to see what it looks like because they say, quote unquote, it keeps me honest, right? Like if you're as a spec coming into their space, they feel like maybe they need to stick with what you're going over. Other people are not having it. So yeah, maybe you're measuring it by that. Maybe you're not the person, if you're the person that's doing the intervention, maybe you're not the person that's doing the inspection. I think you have to think about the client and how they feel about you and how you feel about them, and if that's too much for them or the right amount. But I've done it both ways, where I've been the person doing the inspecting and I've been the person not doing it that's working with the person. I think you have to think of what's going to work for them.
I wanted to add too, there's something you asked about at the beginning of your question, which was about like nothing seems to be happening, sort of like you're going in and I think it's something else that having it in the DSM really brings to light is that this is a mental health challenge. you're not generally asked to go in and help people with their schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or trauma in general. This isn't usually a part of people's job, and it's not an expectation, and that's hard to measure. Nobody ever said to my therapist, in 10 hours, how much better can you make him, right? But this is sort of the equivalent, and it's really, really complicated work. I mean, it takes a lot of real knowledge and wisdom to be able to help someone move forward. So it's difficult, and I think maybe that's part of what having it in the DSM helps with is highlight just how challenging this is, and that we're not just going in and moving things around and making the person better by making the stuff better. And I think maybe that takes a little of the pressure and maybe the frustration off of people's shoulders, thinking, I go in and I spend all this time and we get through nothing. But you spent that time together, right? And you never know when that change moment is going to happen, and someone might say, what else can you tell me about how I can make things better here? But it's not generally assumed that we can go in and work on knowing, health and safety code, being an organizer, being a mental health clinician. All these things are what we're expected to do when we go in. Mm-hmm. Yes?
So I know the presentation dealt with someone kind of transitioning from street into, but what if, just suggestions on someone who's been in supportive housing for 10 years, 15 years, and the common kind of reasoning is, well, I just need a bigger space. What do you expect? I've been here for 10, 15 years. I have all these things, and I can't get rid of it. So just kind of maybe suggestions in dealing with that.
Sure.
That was the majority of the people I worked with. That was an old building. People have been there for a long time. I think it's all similar, and I think that acknowledging that, yes, that makes sense. You have lived here a long time. Your apartment is small. But, and then really breaking down the relationship to the things. Why do you have, what is your attachment to these things? Tell me about your stuff. That's actually probably been my best in, honestly, has just been simply going into someone's apartment and being like, can you just tell me about your stuff? I know you've got a lot of heat from the building, but can you just tell me about it? And then from there, maybe you can work and you can sort of help someone. And again, this is not going to happen tomorrow. This isn't going to happen overnight. It takes a long time. I think we've said maybe 10 or 15 times it's hard work. It is hard. But just like anything else we're doing with our clients in supportive housing, it's we're playing the long game. This is nothing. This is their permanent residence. This is not a transitional where you see the client for a year and then they go and you kind of deal with it again with someone else. This is their permanent residence. So you're going to be dealing with exactly what you're talking about. And I think that, again, I go back to just starting at the same point. Tell me about it and working from there.
I also think that it takes a while to see progress because these ideas are new for people to consider in these light. If you bring it through this lens to people that you're helping, and it takes time to kind of filter down. And oftentimes, even with the Buried in Treasures workshop through the 16 weeks, people will report to us, you know what, I haven't really made much physical change in my space, but wow, I'm starting to get why it's a good idea and why I haven't and how I can going forward. And so people are often excited to start and dip into it a little more. But it's not like you propose the idea and then it's immediately picked up. It takes some processing for people and allowing them to relate to the reasons that they're holding on to things and opening themselves up to challenging their own beliefs about why they're keeping and saving items.
I'm wondering, too, about this idea of moving forward. So somebody's lived in one place for 10 years. They're feeling like, I need more space. Is that a motivator? What would you use the space for? And I think having that conversation about how would life be better if you had more space? And what's the reality of that? What's it going to take? Because we can all strive to do more and have more. We can. Of course, we have to maintain what we have now. But there's also, what about tomorrow? And how would your life be better if you had more space? What would you love to do? Are there places where you can do that in the meantime? But how many of us could fit a tiny percentage of what we probably own into a small unit like a lot of folks are living in? It would be hard. But, I don't know if that addresses your question specifically, but are there things in there that sound like that would be a conversation worth having, or what do you think?
I mean, I think the barrier is the fact of someone wanting to move and actually having the ability, it being a realistic goal that they can.
Right.
You don't want to set an unrealistic goal of everyone knows how housing is in New York to tell someone, yeah, let's pare down your space so we can assist you with moving, when you know that's not something that's probably realistically going to happen for that person, especially if they're dealing with medical issues and mental health and all these other things that it really wouldn't be great for them to move to another space where now those things are kind of impounded. So I think that's the back and forth that staff have.
Yeah. I think, you kind of bring up something which is like, what is our new normal? Like, this is our living condition. If I'm limited because of something physical or finances or something like that, how do I make the most of what I have now? It's not ideal. But I could have less. Like, how can I do the best with what I have? And I guess that's really what we're talking about, is maximizing what we do have. Not to set unrealistic expectations, like if I just do this, I'll have that, because I know it's a big leap. But where else might we be able to find the improvement in quality of life beyond moving to a new place? What else can we do to have that improve? So, yeah, what do I do when I'm stuck, Yeah. I think we're at about that time. All right.
Thank you so
Thank you
much
all.
for being with us today. Thank you.